If you're watching this video, you are a die-hard UFC MMA fan because UFC 301 is one of the weaker cards we've seen for some time now. But we gotta suck it up because UFC 299 and especially UFC 300 were incredibly stacked. And the main event for UFC 301 in Brazil is Steve Erceg, many of you are probably saying who, versus Alexandre Pantoja in the UFC men's flyweight division. Probably the weakest men's division in the UFC, but the main event, we gotta go over it. Pantoja versus Erceg. Erceg, if you don't know who he is, Australian fighter, 3 fights in the UFC, considered a young prospect, which I guess applies to him in the flyweight division, considering he's 28 years old. Topuria is younger than him and is a champion already, so depends what you classify as a prospect. And he's going up against Pantoja, who's more of an established guy in the UFC. And my prediction is Alexandre Pantoja to win by decision.
My same predictions, yeah, Alexandre Pantoja by decision as well.
Yeah, with Pantoja, my brother and I talked about it a little bit. Think about Davison Figueiredo. Figueiredo beat Pantoja, and Figueiredo's kind of the staple, kind of the prototype specimen of what's going to beat Pantoja. If you haven't seen Pantoja fight, he pretty much is a dog. He'll go in there, eat one to give a harder shot. He hits pretty hard, has a crazy chin, but with Figueiredo, he has insane grappling, which counters Pantoja's grappling, which you saw against Brandon Royval. And he has insane power, which you've seen against his fights with Brandon Moreno. And the power that Figueiredo had was enough to make Pantoja think about coming in and actually hurt him in that fight and drop him. And the grappling, it was able to stalemate that. So at that point, you could beat him. Steve Erceg came off a recent knockout against Matt Schnell, who gets knocked out a lot. Actually got knocked out by somebody else in his last fight. So I wouldn't classify that as a big win. I don't remember who he fought the time before, but it was a pretty close fight. We could tell he was the better fighter.
Like a shorter guy, yeah.
Yeah, but he should have done better. But I mean, it's hard to say when the number 10 ranked guy is fighting the number 1 ranked guy, and the number 10 ranked guy has only fought 3 times in the UFC, and he's fighting in Brazil against a guy who's superior in, I'd say, every aspect of martial arts. How do you give Erceg the edge in this fight?
Yeah, Alexandre Pantoja's striking, let's be honest, looks freaking sloppy. I mean, when he fought against Brandon Moreno, I was like, man, this Brandon Moreno's way above him in terms of just technique, especially because Moreno's boxing is actually very good. But the thing with Pantoja is you got to make him respect your power. If you don't have enough power to make him back up, which it seems like the only person that has enough power to make him do that, especially in the flyweight division with a lot of these small guys, is Davison Figueiredo. And we've seen in Erceg's last fight, he did knock out Matt Schnell, but the other fights were decision fights. And he seems to have a very similar build to Brandon Royval, just a long, lanky striker. And like I said, Alexandre Pantoja is just he just comes at you, just steps forward all the time, never backs up, doesn't seem to care if he gets hit. And unless you have that Davison Figueiredo power, which is some crazy power you just don't see in the 125 division, I don't see how you beat Pantoja.
I also don't see how people can pick Erceg. When we think about young prospects, and you pick the young prospect like we did with Topuria versus Volkanovski, so a young guy who hasn't really fought anyone in the top 5, is going up against a good champion, you typically don't choose a prospect unless you've seen him have dominant performances against other people. Islam Makhachev is another example where a lot of people picked Makhachev to beat Oliveira in their first fight. Makhachev was even the favorite in that fight. Topuria wasn't even the favorite against Volkanovski.
Yeah, slight underdog.
So when you think about the prospect, they have to show you something from lesser ranked guys in his division to kind of make you decide to pick them to win the fight. And honestly, kind of like at least show you that they can beat them. And I have not seen anything from Steve Erceg to show he can beat Pantoja. It's a very weird prediction video because there's just not much information on the guy, and the title fight came out of left field.
Yeah, so, I mean, especially for a main event.
Yeah, so it's the main event of the card. I mean, you know, a men's main event, a men's title fight is a men's title fight. It's a weak card, but we're picking Pantoja by decision. Let us know what you guys think. Shorter video because it is, a weaker card.
Yeah, and there's also just not much on Steve Erceg. I mean, he has 3 fights in the UFC. You know, the only time I can think of someone getting a title shot this quickly was Alex Pereira, but we had all his kickboxing fights prior with Adesanya, and
he also beat someone in the top
5, and then obviously he just has a lot on his resume, on his combat sports resume, so it's easier to analyze a fight like that. But Steve Erceg, there's nothing much to see there, there's not been a lot on him, and we both think that Alexandre Pantoja will get the job done against Steve Erceg.
Yep, and still.